Hi, my name is Andrew Hakenewerth, and I'm the Assistant Director of Bands and Applied Trombone Professor at Washburn University. And today we are going to be going over the 6 KMEA audition excerpts for tenor trombone. The first excerpt that we're going to talk about at the top of the page is Hammersmith by Gustav Holst. When I think about playing this excerpt, there are 3 things that come to mind. First, keeping time. Second, not losing that time in a slower excerpt, and then playing the accidentals and playing as in tune as humanly possible. So one way to do this is by taking each bit of the excerpt and breaking it into smaller chunks for your practice. Typically, if you start at the left corner, then play to the right corner, and you don't microsize the different measures, then oftentimes your improvement will be a little slower than what it could be. So when I practice this, I break this into 4 bar chunks, listening for intonation, beautiful tone, and smooth connection through all of the notes. The goal for this is to make all of those notes sound as smooth and as beautiful and as resonant as humanly possible, and allowing our air to blow through and between each of those notes to allow that to happen. In the next part, we have a little bit more accidentals. We have a D sharp, we have another C sharp, and then we have G sharp. These accidentals are designed to give this particular portion of the excerpt a little bit of color. And even though the excerpt itself is piano, I like to bring this part out a little bit more because it provides a little bit like the first moment of tension. And it doesn't necessarily have to be louder than everything you've played before. It just has to have a little bit more kind of oomph, made up words. They're really helpful when you learn things, right? And the last thing that I would think about in this excerpt is thinking about how my air functions whenever we have leaps of greater than a whole step or a half step. The one that I think about in general is 4 bars before the end from that G sharp to that E natural. A lot of students will do something like this, where they'll stop their air and they'll use their tongue to articulate that E natural, when what you really want is to not do that and to get the tongue out of the way and allow your air to be the thing that makes that connection happen. This allows for a more smooth connection in between, and it doesn't create like a random hitch in your sound. Whenever I hear students play the burlesque for the very first time, more often than not, I kind of see the eyes widen in the fact that there's a ton of eighth notes that exist on this page. The first thing that I would tell you is that just because they're eighth notes, and just because it's a little faster than the excerpt that we played before, there's no cause for panic. Slow, methodical practice and putting the slide exactly where it's supposed to be in your practice will help. So what I generally do is I take my metronome, the quarter note is at 112, and what I do is I play it in half time, or make the measures last twice as long for a couple reasons. The first is to make sure that I place the slide exactly where it's supposed to go to make the most resonant and most beautiful pitch that I possibly can for that moment, even though it's a little faster. And then as you get more comfortable with placing the slide exactly where it's supposed to go, then you make it a little faster. And generally what I like to do when I'm practicing this way is I actually like to take it a little bit faster than what it says on the page, because if you do that, then when you slow it down, it becomes even easier than what it felt like earlier. The next thing that I would talk about with this particular excerpt, and what I would listen for if I were judging this excerpt, is what is the student going to do in the crescendo poco a poco section? In this spot, we're crescendoing little by little. If the only thing you learn from this video is that you need to translate all the terms on your page, then I will have done my gig. Then you have to space that crescendo all the way out. You can't give away that it's going to be fortissimo later on in the excerpt by being fortissimo too soon. So what I generally like to do whenever I'm playing this is the beginning says forte. For the purposes of my audition, I like to play it more like a mezzo forte minus, which isn't a real thing, but it is for the ear. So that way it gives me more space to grow when I make it to that fortissimo section. And then you can listen back to the longer version of this to hear that progression. The last thing I would listen for, if I were judging this excerpt, would be, is the student making a difference between accented notes and normal articulated notes? Specifically, 3 bars before the brightly section, we have this thing that exists that is an accented staccato. And to me, accented staccato just means I want to give it a little bit more weight. So if I were to play this, I'd go toe, 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 and just give it a little bit more emphasis than the notes before. Just giving it a little bit more, so that way the adjudicator can hear the difference between normally articulated notes and accented notes. The third excerpt on the list is Rolling Thunder by Henry Fillmore. This is one of the more famous marches that exists that's not written by John Philip Sousa. The reference recording on the website is by the United States Marine Band, and this particular excerpt is very, very fast. If you are able to play as fast as the Marine Band and can play it cleanly, you should come see me at Washburn University. If you can't, my advice to you would be this: to play it as quickly as you can, as cleanly as you can. Because what they're looking for is 2 things. The first is, did you listen to the recording before you started? If you go in there and play it very slowly, then the judges typically tend to stop listening after a little while. The other part is, if you play it too fast and it's not clean, then you're kind of just fumbling around, and then it sets the tone for the remainder of your audition. So my advice would be to play it as quickly as you can, as cleanly as you can, and by using a metronome and slowly working up to a faster tempos, that is how you're going to be successful in this particular excerpt. Even in my own practice, of the 6 excerpts that are on this page, this is the one that I spent the most metronome practice on. The next excerpt that we're going to talk about is the Orient et Occident by Camill Saint-Saens. And when I'm working on this particular excerpt, there are three things that I like to think about. First thing is using my airspeed and air support, using generous wind to blow through and all the way up to that high A flat, playing in a march style, and then playing the ink exactly as it is on the page, specifically really thinking about the slurs in between the concert G and F and the slur between E flat and D. If you are a student that has issue with achieving the upper range of your instrument, specifically talking about notes concert G and higher, I have a couple of tricks and a couple of exercises that we can use in order to help you reach that range. The first thing I like to do is a gliss exercise. It's the whole point of why I even wanted to play trombone in the first place. And I like using this because when we start at the lowest part of our instrument and gliss up to the top, it shows us that our air is the thing that allows us to ascend in range, and then we apply that same kind of air in that harmonic series to help us when we move vertically as opposed to horizontally. An example of that would be it's my most favorite exercise in the whole wide world, and one of the reasons why we even choose to play trombone to begin with, because glissandos are fun. So after you get used to doing that, you then approach it in a scale pattern. For myself, I really like to use the B flat major scale, because that at the top of the B flat major scale is where we get those notes that generally tend to challenge us more. Even for myself in that particular run through, I had a tiny little hitch between the G and the A. And what I need to do to get rid of that little hiccup is to allow my air to get faster sooner. Another thing that I do during these scale exercises is I take the tongue completely out of the equation, I let it sit at the bottom of my mouth, and I gliss through everything and use my air as my engine for ascending into my range. And if you let your air be the thing that carries you through these excerpts, then you'll find that these upper range notes are much easier than what they seem to be. Looking a little further into the excerpt, the next thing that I want to really talk about after we work through the range stuff is the style. This particular piece has elements of both Eastern and Western music in it. Saint-Saens was very, very interested in combining both styles of music in his writing. So this has Western style march quality with a little bit of Eastern music inflection. Okay? So what we generally tend to do is we don't want to play this like a legato exercise where everything is just kind of like smooth and runs together like this. We want to give each note a little bit of bounce, a little bit of bounce and a little bit of space to make it feel very march-like. This is right on the second line. Another thing that you'll notice is occasionally throughout all of the excerpts in this video, I like to use alternate positions in different spots whenever I play. My rule for alternate positions on the trombone whenever I play is if the space in between the first note and the next note after the alternate position allows me to have less motion, then I will do that over playing it in the primary position. And if the note is of shorter duration, like a quarter or an eighth or something like that. If you are playing this, so like let's say I were to play this in its primary position at this speed. It's perfectly fine to do that. For me, I generally like to keep the sawing to a minimum because whenever I move my slide back and forth quickly like this, that's generally when more mistakes occur. If I keep everything succinct and very close together, then all of a sudden it becomes easier. The next thing that we're going to talk about is the #1 etude in the 40 Progressive Studies by Tyrell. This book is designed for collegiate level students and very gifted high school students to work on more advanced rhythms and counting. The first mistake that I hear whenever I hear students perform this for me for the first time is they take this at a very, very fast and oftentimes unplayable tempo. You'll notice that on the excerpt, there is not a tempo marking. So what this means is, what they're looking for is not the fastest rendition of how this is played, but a in time, in tone, and in tune musical form of this bit. The next thing that I hear whenever I listen to students play this is, more often than not, it's not the triplet section that trips up students, but rather the half notes that are tied to them. We generally have a tendency to jump off of those notes a little soon because we're just really excited about playing those triplets first. So what I like to do to help my students work their way through that is do something called a check pattern. Basically what I do is I take exactly what is written. So the first measure is a concert A. And what we're going to do is instead of playing a half note, we're going to play a system of 2 triplets on that pitch. So that way, not only are you subdividing in your brain, you're also subdividing in your performance. And then once you subdivide it like that, what you do is you remove it from the world and keep it in your brain, and then play what's on the page and then subdivide exactly like you just did when you played it that way. And this works very well with every single instance of half note tied to the first triplet in each of these systems. The next thing that I would offer when working on this excerpt in general, you'll notice that a lot of these have some kind of tie to some scale, whatever that may be. So first one has a inflection in F major, F, A, C, E natural, D, C. And then the next one, B flat, G, F, E natural, G, E, C. So you stay in that kind of F major and then you switch over to kind of like a C. And then when we make it to the bottom line, we have a little bit further of a leap between an F and a C. Now, because we have a different pattern in this particular line, I would treat this one a little differently, and I would work on each of these triplet patterns very slowly to make sure that the distance between all of the notes and what I need to do to make those pitches happen feel easier, especially when it's slower. So this is the second line. So if you really want to make this excerpt be one of your stronger ones, remember these things. Subdivide, subdivide, subdivide. Use a metronome, and don't take off at a tempo faster than what you can play as beautifully as possible. The last etude we're going to be talking about is the Melodius Etude number 10, and this is in the Joannes Rochut book or the Marco Bordoni book, whichever version that you may have, whether it's off of the internet or if you own the book yourself. They are very close to being the same with a few annotations that are different throughout. This piece is my favorite in that it's the more lyrical, beautiful kind of style of playing. The Rochut and the Bordoni books are designed to teach trombonists how to use their air and their wind to play their instrument as closely to the human voice as possible. So when you play this, you have to treat it like a song like you would sing. So the first thing that I would do is go through each system and try and play them as smooth and as connected as possible. Another really awesome thing about this etude is your instructions are con expressione, which is a fancy way of just saying with expression. So it starts off piano, and it stays piano the entire time except for when it gives you some kind of dynamic contrast at the end to have you grow and die away on the tied over dotted half at the end. You have the freedom of being able to put in your own dynamics in this particular excerpt. And the difference between someone who doesn't get a seat, someone who gets a seat, and someone who wins the audition is the person who really puts dynamics to this and really makes it into a song. Generally, what I like to do is whenever I see any of these lines that are covered with a long legato slur marking, I like to look for the apex of all of these excerpts, all of these lines. So that way I grow to that spot. So a spot that I really like to work on with my students is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this is pickups into bar 6, where it has that high G towards the end of the line. And a lot of my students say that the high G is the apex, but to me, the downbeat of bar 7 is actually the apex of the line. That's where you're supposed to be going to, right? So to achieve that, I do something like this. So that way when I make it there, as I descend, I can die away a little bit and kind of make that contrast of growth and decay, which occurs naturally in music. The next thing I would think about whenever I'm teaching my students how to play this is another one of those that's very slow, but looks incredibly involved because of how it is written. It's one of the few, if not the only excerpt that is in 6/8. And we're trying to make this as easy and almost even dance-like as possible. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Ya da 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 da. If you think about that and you make it more dance-like and more like a song instead of like a trombone excerpt that we have to all the way through, then the excerpt becomes a little bit simpler. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this instructional video on the KMEA audition excerpts for the year 2023. It's my hope that you find these tips and these recordings helpful in your practice. And if you would like additional help, whether it be you send me an email of your playing or even want to come out and take a lesson at Washburn University, you can find my contact info in the description box of this video. Thank you so much, and good luck.